Warning, this podcast contains spoilers for the 1982 film Blade Runner. I mean, like, if you haven't seen Blade Runner, legitimately go see it. We're stepping out of airlocks you people have never seen into the rain-soaked, shadow-filled world of replicants, Nexus 3, 4, 5, and 6, and the rainy streets of almost 21st century Los Angeles to talk about the summer of 1982 and the sci-fi masterpiece Blade Runner, as chosen by you, the listeners of X-Ray Vision, directed by Ridley Scott, screenplay by Hampton Fancher and David Peoples, impeccable, iconic fucking score by the Greek musician Vangelis, who absolutely, like, shit still sounds futuristic. Sounds you so can't even, good.
It's so good. It's like one of the best original soundtracks of all time. I mean, it's so impactful to me that the biggest compliment I can give a film score is that it sounds like Vangelis. So, like, Aquaman actually has a very Vangelis sounding soundtrack, and I just listened to it so much because I was like, absolutely no one listens to this. Like, no one realizes that this exists, and it is just so good. Yeah, Vangelis is the best.
And it's, of course, based on the Philip K. Dick story, Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? The movie stars Harrison Ford as Rick Deckard, who may or may not be human. The American film debut of Rutger Hauer, German star Rutger Hauer as the ominous Roy Batty. Sean Young in her, I think, feature film debut as Rachel. Edward James Olmos as Gaff. When did you first come into contact with Blade Runner?
Well, Blade Runner is one of my mum's favorite films. So this movie has been perennially in my life, my whole life. It was something we always had on VHS. I have seen I've now seen every different one of the 7 cuts. I have seen Blade Runner many times in the cinema, both the director's cut and then when it was finally released, I saw one of the best experiences of my life regarding Vangelis as well was I saw the final cut at the BFI, the British Film Institute, on the South Bank in London, and the soundtrack was just like unreal. They had those big, good speakers. So yeah, no, for me, this is up there like with movies like E.T. and those Goonies, you know, like obviously it's different artistic style, but to me, this is one of those perennial cinema classics that's kind of always been in my life because it came out like 6 years before I was born.
Yeah, I can't even remember when the first time I saw it was, but I will guarantee you that I didn't understand it when the first 50 times I watched it. Because I didn't understand what was happening, and it wasn't until later. I was mostly responding to, wow, this is so cool looking.
Yeah, the vibes. It's a very vibesy movie.
I mean, that first opening shot of future Los Angeles with the big noodle advertisement on the building and all the spinner ships coming through and the big blimp telling you, hey, explore the off-world colonies. It was like, it legitimately looked like the most futuristic thing I had ever seen. And I was just completely blown away at how like lived in and real it looked. Like, I mean, Star Wars was lived in as well, but there was...
Star Wars is like, it's lovely, but it's very of its time, and it did not have a big budget, and it was definitely... It has like janky moments, you know, like it was lived in, and it looks great. Like I love that aesthetic, but Blade Runner is like the use of miniatures, the cinematography.
Oh my God.
It feels like a real world. And even in like the early 90s, which was realistically probably when I watched it, it felt so immersive and so unlike anything else.
What are your thoughts? Your just immediate emotional and intellectual reaction to watching Blade Runner: The Final Cut in 2022?
It's one of those interesting things where it's like, it's so influential that when you watch it, it could almost feel derivative, but it's not, because it's the thing that everyone else
That's a
is
great point.
taking from, you know? So I think that's always really interesting to watch a movie in that context where you sort of go, whoa, this has just influenced so much stuff to the point of, you know, some of it's to the point of parody. It gets parodied so much that neon-hued, bleak neo-noir aesthetic, you know, so many other sci-fi movies have aped it. But it's just, I think it's a really sad, sweet story about just trying to be a human. And I think that, and trying to be like trying to do the right thing and all those kind of things that humans really care about. And I feel like it's very universal and it's like, it's very cool, but also like, I understand why it was like a film that my mum loved, because like, I feel like anyone could just watch this and find something in it to connect with.
Yeah, I loved and this is like, I didn't pick up on this in the hundreds of other times that I've watched this, but I love the way there's no replicant culture because they die after 4 years.
Yeah.
And they live these extremely hard lives.
That life is their life span is made to deny them of culture or legacy or ancestry or anything that can be built, because they're only alive for so long and they live these lives as like basically indentured servants.
So our outlaws are essentially trying to create something like a replicant culture basically out of nowhere, and the best they can come up with is human culture. Like there's this really great moment where Roy and Pris are at JF Sebastian's, and if JF Sebastian is like one of the genetic engineers who is responsible for the products that the Tyrell Corporation makes. And JF is just realizing that these are Nexus 6s, the most advanced replicants. And Pris says,
I think, Sebastian, therefore I am.
And then she looks at Roy like, you know, really pleased with herself. And then Roy looks at her like he's proud of what she's like, very good, Pris, that's great. It's like, so why do they follow Roy? Because Roy knows human stuff. Mm-hmm. Roy is the one who understands the meaning behind all these human sayings and human art and human music and culture and an appreciation of the little things of what it means to be alive in the same way that humans appreciate those things. And he's teaching them, he's giving that to them because he's the smartest of all of them. And I just found that like incredibly touching. Like imagine you had no culture at all. You come from a people that have no idea where you come from, and the only way that you can kind of like build out your own view of the world is through the pieces that you take from these other people who created and enslaved you. It's really fucking sad.
Yeah, there's a lot of really, really interesting, dark, complex stuff. And I think that, like you talked about, you know, Roy, and I think you just can't underestimate how good Rutger Hauer is in this movie. Like, he's so emotionally charged and powerful and sad and righteously angry. And I think something that really, even the happy ending, let's put it in inverted quotes, version of the movie, like, this is a very bleak movie, and I think that's part of the reason that it stood the test of time, because there's not really a lot of movies like that kind of embrace this like inherent sadness of the world and inherent kind of grind.
Yeah.
Because like that is the replicant's life is a microcosm of, you know, most of our lives. Like most people's lives is this dedicated to only being able to work and just trying to survive in this very brief amount of time that we have. And I just think it's also like a really cool movie. I think that one of the biggest things that stands out to me in 2022 contextually and with much more understanding that I have and brilliant work done by many other people is just like, it definitely plays into the fear that America had of kind of like Japan as this
big time
all encroaching force. And I think it's hard to disconnect from that notion of it. Like that is what the explanation of the way that Neo LA looks, you know, is very much based in that. But I do also think it has a lot to offer and is really interesting, even in spite of the flaws.
I'm glad you brought that up because I feel very much the same way, very complicated about the depiction of the influence of Japanese culture, Asian culture, East Asian culture on neo-LA. The movie came out June 25th, 1982, and only 6 days before this, Vincent Chin, Asian-American Vincent Chin, was murdered in Detroit with a baseball bat, and his two killers were auto workers who were, one of the reasons they cited for why they flew off the handle and killed this guy with a baseball bat was that they were angry over Japanese cars being imported into the U.S., undercutting the American auto industry and leading to one of these killers losing their job. By the way, the men were fined $3,000 and did no jail time. Although later in a civil court case, there was a larger monetary settlement. So this fear of a rising Japan is like all over every movie from the 80s. I could go through the litany of movies that have this as an influence, but you really see it throughout the 80s, ending with, I think, Rising Sun is the last one, like early 90s, where I really felt like, oh, here's another last one of these movies. But I will say here, the other thing about it is, and there is a lot of appropriation here, but also this is like one of the very few overt depictions of East Asia, particularly Japan, as a cultural power. Like it's not just that Deckard is like eating noodles. He's eating noodles at a stand that is worked by, Asian people. There's Asian writing there. Everyone around him is Asian. And it feels in that way, because of that, it's part of what gives the movie its staying power, because it's an acknowledgement of Japanese culture as a worldwide force, something that was not really acknowledged, certainly in the early 80s. Like, there was no perception of Japan as a cultural force internationally. And here in this movie, you're showing that, maybe for the wrong reasons, maybe because of fear about Japan, but that's part of what makes it feel like a vital and current piece of art.
It's actually really interesting because it kind of speaks to something that I think comics do a lot as well, which is like intent versus impact, and that can be negative and positive. Like, you can try and do something good, but the impact can be negative. Or, as many of these, like Blade Runner, I think a lot about the original character of Valkyrie in Marvel Comics, who was presented to be this like feminist nightmare character who was this kind of like, this is what would happen if women were actually powerful. It would be terrible. They would be villains. But instead you created this totally badass character that ended up taking on an importance of its own. And I kind of think Blade Runner fits into that in its own way, though there's been lots of brilliant and very, very legitimate critiques of that aspect. I also think that in its own way, it put a spotlight on certain parts of Asian culture, or the idea of a cultural power that had been ignored. And also it has some really iconic Asian actors in it. James Hong is in it, one of my all-time favorites.
Fucking legend, James Hong.
There's a lot of really brilliant actors in this movie, and I think that's a really interesting point that you bring up about that, where it's kind of that, like, it was meant to be this kind of fear-mongering thing, but it has this other element too that we put the power on by reading it in a certain way.
Thank you for stating in a much more succinct way the thing that I was trying to say. And then finally, the other, this is part of that conversation, but the other reason that I feel I have complex feelings sometimes about this movie is I love the look of Neo LA. How drowned in rain it is, how messy it is, how everything is kind of like built on top of each other. But it's notable to me that, we often talk about Blade Runner's dystopian, a worse future. Like, what makes it worse? Well, part of what clearly the intent was, how do we show that this is worse? We show it messy, we show it dirty, etc. But also it's like, look at all these non-Americans that live
Yeah,
here.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
how
yeah.
it
Look at all
works.
these immigrants. Like, look at.
They're not even speaking English, and
Yeah,
this is
yeah.
terrible, isn't it? Now, again, what's happened is in the intervening years, this is actually how we live. This is part of life, and it's not. There are certainly people that take it in a very negative way, but this is just modernity.
The irony as well is like America is the immigration has long been a part of the contemporary idea of America, right? And also, it's just very ironic because the real dystopian aspects of Blade Runner that are legit are like the pollution and the horrific climate crisis.
Yes.
That is very, very real rather than any notion about that aspect. But yeah, like you said, I mean, there's so much stuff. Like, I think this is why we love this stuff, is like we love it and we want to talk about how great it is and also pick it apart. And the reason we pick it apart is because we really enjoy it. Like, this is such a brilliantly made movie, but obviously like the women in the movie have a very specific way of being represented. Now, I personally think there's actually a lot of power in like Rachel's story, and I love Pris is like such a brilliant character, but they both also fall into tropes. But then again, we talk about this a lot. This is a film that's meant to fall into tropes. Like Blade Runner, we talk about how it's original, and it is original in a science fiction Hollywood space, but it's also a noir Philip Marlowe PI story just thrown into this. You have to have this inversion. Rachel is the femme fatale, but she's not. Pris is actually kind of the femme fatale. Like, it's really, there's a lot of cool ways that it plays and subverts those tropes, and I think that's another reason. I mean, when you think about neo-noir, this is the movie you think of, not like a 2022 noir that's set in the contemporary day. You think of a 1982 movie that was set in a future that we've now passed. That's mad.
As a just kind of as a needing to get some context to kind of like what sci-fi and future sci-fi was like doing at this time, I also watched Escape from New York, which is another is like the East Coast version of The Future is Worse. It's overrun with criminals, many of whom are black and brown, and all the female characters are in prison. You don't see any of them outside. And all the people in power who run the prison and the people in the jet with the president, except for the female terrorist who crashes the plane, are all white guys.
I will say, though, John Carpenter does a good job in that movie, right? Of the, subversion.
The subversion, but then the subversion, much like Blade Runner it's actually a statement about how America sees certain groups. And it's basically about how the only way we're comfortable, and when I say we, I say like America. The only way America is most comfortable with people of color in the context of law enforcement, enforcing their laws on them. And the same thing with women. Why are all the women in jail? Because America is most comfortable with women when they are imposing their laws on them. And it's that kind of thing where, geez, on the surface, I'm not sure how to feel about this, and then you dig down a little bit and you're like, oh shit, this is actually, whether you meant this or not, this is actually brilliant.
Exactly. And I think that Blade Runner does a similar thing, like in that's a really great comparison, because Escape from New York, the president sucks, and all the people around the president suck. So this hierarchical white American elite is actually also the villain. And I think something that Blade Runner done is the notion of like corporations as a villain. Tyrell is the villain. So even though there are these things in there that if you want to read into them that way can seem quite radical. I mean, I love John Carpenter so much. So I watch Escape from LA and Escape from New York and Escape from LA actually quite a lot. I love Escape from LA. Of course I do. Come on, it's me. I love every movie. I love every bad sequel. But or sequel that other people think is bad. I think it's good. Both times when I've watched those movies, I'm like, I'd like that. I'm like, just let me live in there. I'm like the demilitarized zone where it's like lawless and there's no law enforcement. I'm like, please put me in there. Like, let's get to that dystopia, because I think a good thing could come out of that.
What's your favorite Blade Runner scene?
So I know that the common answer is the Roy Batty speech, which is so amazing, and like I said, Rutger Hauer is so great. But my favorite scene is the stuff. I love the noir stuff between Rachel and Deckard.
Yeah.
I love Enhance, something I still quote every single day.
That is
and
one of the most quietly iconic scenes.
They
Yeah,
still do
happens.
it now in like every TV show, whether you're watching fucking Stranger Things or NCIS or probably like EastEnders. Somebody's enhancing a fucking photo in a way that could never be enhanced. But my favorite stuff is the JF Sebastian and Pris stuff, because I think that stuff is just so moving. That stuff just blows my mind every time I watch it. It gets me in a gut punch. It makes me almost so uncomfortable that I don't want to watch it, but I warm to it, and I just think it's so good.
I was about to say the exact same thing, where their entire, I can't call it a meet cute, but like when she engineers their bumping into him, everything that follows from there, talking about how old he is, he's got this genetic disorder that's making him age faster, and they connect over that. The fact that his entire apartment is filled with these robots that are his friends. He doesn't have friends, so he makes them. The fact that they're both weirdly on like the same kind of maturity level, despite the fact that they are outwardly like adults. One, because Pris is like 3.5 or whatever, clearly near her date, and JF Sebastian is just a person who like has been shunned by the world and is operating on an intellectual level that doesn't allow him to connect to people. It's actually heartbreaking. I do have one question, which is like, why the fuck is JF Sebastian like boiling 6 eggs forever on his stove?
He's just a weirdo. That's just like his weirdo quirk. You've got to. I mean, I still say in my house, home again, jiggity jig. That's like a classic phrase, Yeah, I think that something that movie does very well, that is very effective, is that the notion of that similarity or blurred line between like the toys that JF has in his house and the replicants. Like that kind of, the replicants are seeking out this humanity, but really they're just these toys, these ballerina kind of dolls. And Daryl Hannah is so brilliant as Pris. I mean, Sean Young is also so wonderful as Rachel. I just think that I always remember Pris just made me feel so sad as a little kid, and those kind of memories really stick with you. You're less bothered about the romance or the this and the that, but those things that gut check you, that's really what gets you.
Yeah, I'd feel the same way. Just anything about being alone and trying to connect with anyone, literally anyone else, about anything. That was the thing that really stood out to me. That, and the fact that I don't think I had seen a movie up to that point that had ever like really explored, not that I would have called it a moral question, but the moral question of if robots are as smart as us with thoughts like us, then are they alive, and how do we treat them? 2001, which I maybe had seen around the same time, kind of sort of deals with this. It's a lot more
esoteric, though. This definitely has more of a emotional heart.
With Hal is mainly like a psycho, like just like a companion and then a psycho killer, and it's not really until the end where he's like begging for his life, like, Dave, I'm afraid, don't unplug me, where you are like, whoa, oh God, what is this? But Blade Runner is all of that, and that is something that I could not stop thinking about when I first saw the movie. Like, God, if we could make Robbie the Robot or Tweety from Buck Rogers, like, then how could you just turn them off?
Exactly.
Like, or R2 or C-3PO. Like, why would it be okay to just turn them off then?
Yeah.
And that is something this movie inspired me to think about, and I have not been able to stop thinking about since. Do you have any other favorite moments from the movie?
I mean, the whole movie is really quite, when you watch it, especially if it's been, I love to listen to people who are like younger than me talking about it, because I feel like it's such a perennial part of like my life that it's almost like a cozy blanket. Like, to me, this is like, it fits into that like popcorn movie realm, but like an auteur-driven popcorn movie. Like, you know, I would say the first Jurassic Park fits into that, though it's definitely more on the popcorn side of the spectrum. But, you know, E.T., definitely Jaws, movies where there's a lot of moments where I saw Jaws on the beach in Long Beach, which was just brilliant. But like, I've seen that movie so many times, but I was thinking when I was on the beach, I was like, there's a lot of kids there, you know, there's a lot of families, it's free screening. And there's a good like 25 minutes of them just like getting drunk and singing sea shanties. And I was like, how is this the movie that made a blockbuster summer be a thing, you know? So I think that this fits into that realm for me where there's just so much that I like about it. And watching it is kind of like it's just a comfort thing at this point. I mean, I'm not, there was a lot of other movies that in my grand scheme of movies, I would place higher than Blade Runner now. Probably a lot to do with the closeness I have to the movie. But like, I was not at all surprised this was the movie that our very clever listeners picked. Because this is the iconic. There's so many movies from 1982, but this is that movie that has taken on this legacy.
I think it's certainly... I think you could very easily argue it's the most influential. Like, but you know, there's any number of interviews with filmmakers, Christopher Nolan, et cetera, who have said, "Oh, Blade Runner, that really inspired the kind of look and feel of what we were trying."
Yeah, everyone
to do
wants to make their own Blade Runner.